We are delighted to welcome you to this session of the 15th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swast, India. It is our pleasure to present today the first ghosts, most ancient of legacies, Irving Finkel in conversation with Nayanjot Lahiri. British philologist Irving Finkel's latest book, The First Ghosts, Most Ancient of Legacies, takes us back to the very beginning of ancient times. A world-renowned authority on cuneiform, the form of writing on clay tablets that dates back to 3400 BC, Irving Finkel has embarked upon an ancient ghost hunt, scouring these tablets to unlock the secrets of the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, to breathe new life into the first ghost stories ever written. In conversation with historian and archaeologist of ancient India, Nayanjot Lahiri, Finkel uncovers practical details of how to live with ghosts, how to get rid of them and bring them back, and how to avoid becoming one, as well as exploring more philosophical questions. What are ghosts? Why does the idea of them remain so powerful despite the lack of concrete evidence? And what do they tell us about being human? Irving Finkel is senior curator in the Middle East Department of the British Museum, where he reads cuneiform inscriptions in Sumerian and Akkadian. He also works on traditional Indian board games and is the author of The Ark Before Noah and other works for adults and children. Finkel is the founder of the Great Diary Project, which rescues unwanted private diaries for the future. Nayanjot Lahiri is professor of history at Ashoka University. Her books include Finding Forgotten Cities, How the Indus Civilization Was Discovered, Monuments Matter, India's Archaeological Heritage Since Independence, Timepieces, a whistle-stop tour of ancient India and archaeology, and The Public Purpose, writings on and by M.N. Deshpande. Her book Ashoka in Ancient India won the 2016 John F. Richards Prize for the best book in South Asian history. Please feel free to send in your comments by typing them in the comment section. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2022 and tag @JaipurLitFest. Ladies and gentlemen, the first ghosts, most ancient of legacies, Irving Finkel in conversation with Nayanjot Lahiri.
Hi everyone, welcome to the session with Dr. Irving Finkel, the author of The First Ghosts. This book, I think, is perhaps the most unusual and fascinating books that will feature in this year's edition of the Jaipur Literary Festival. Especially warm welcome to you, Irving, for being here, even though it is virtually. And I think it would be great to begin by you just holding up your book for everyone to see.
Right, here is a copy.
Wow, I think I'm also seeing it for the first time because I have actually only a PDF version. What a beautiful cover.
A lot of labor went onto this cover, I can tell you. Yes, it's rather exciting.
Please go
also,
ahead.
the important thing is it's called The First Ghosts, but there's a subtitle which is Most Ancient of Legacies. And as will emerge from our discussion, that is half the point in writing it, to show how far back in time the idea and the belief in ghosts extends and how broadly throughout the world.
So I wanted to ask you, in fact, about the Mesopotamian sources, and I realized the first ghosts that are recorded in the literary sources of Mesopotamia may well be one of the reasons why you call this book The First Ghosts. But obviously you have a very deep knowledge of cuneiform writing on clay tablets. The kind of stuff which we in India usually see in programs on television, and also, of course, in books that deal with the first civilization of the world. But yeah, I can also see that you're a lover of Shakespeare, because each chapter of your book begins with a quotation from the different works of that great bard. Now, Shakespeare, it seems from whatever you put there, was a deeply believing poet. But I think to satisfy the curiosity of those who will see this, what drew you to ghosts? considering very early in the book, you confess that you haven't seen one. I mean, do you
Yes.
have friends and acquaintances who, unlike you, have actually encountered ghosts?
Well, that is in fact the answer, because I've always been interested and I've never seen one. But when I was at school, I had a very close friend called Peter. We were buddies in the strong sense of the word. And when I was about 20, Peter told me that when he was a boy of 7, something happened to him when he was in bed asleep, and he woke up one night in the dark with a light from the hall coming through the door, and there was a lady sitting on the chair in his room with a black dress with a high collar looking at him. And he sat up in bed and she looked at him without saying anything, and then she said, "Go away," in a very strict voice. And Peter, being only 7, didn't know what to do, so he lay down again and went to sleep. And the following morning he asked his mother, "Who was that lady in my bedroom?" And she said, "There's no lady in your bedroom. What are you talking about?" So he described what he'd seen. And later that day, his mum was in the garden talking to the neighbor and described this old lady that appeared in Peter's room. And the neighbor said, "Oh, I know who that is. She used to live in that room long ago, and she died in that room." Well, this was the most hair-raising on the back of your neck kind of experience. And when Peter told me we were going for a long walk one evening about this story, every word burned into my ear because it was so extraordinary. And ever since then, I've always hoped to see one and never have. But as a grown-up person, starting to work in the British Museum, because my job there is to read, as you say, these cuneiform tablets. So they're written on clay, and the writing is poked into the surface of the clay with a stick like a chopstick. It's not written in ink or like with a pencil, but impressed. And this is the oldest writing we have so far in the world. And it began in about 3,500 BC. So that's a very, very long time ago, long before the Indus Valley even, if I may dare say so. But the interesting thing is that from about, say, 2000 BC or 1800 BC, that sort of time, among all the tablets which exist, there's an increasing number to deal with the subject of ghosts. So you have a piece of clay with written signs across it, and you can't tell when you look at it, is it a letter? Is it a hymn? Or is it some kind of business document? But sometimes they are written by the priests, the exorcists, whose job it was in the culture when people had trouble with ghosts to get rid of them. And the interesting thing here, the most important thing is this: the writing looks like nothing on earth. And when you deciphered it and can read it today, lunatics like me, who've spent their whole life reading these things, can read them more or less like newspaper. We really understand the languages. And the languages are the Sumerian language and the Babylonian language. And among all of the records, there's a whole group over about 3,000 years of time, from the beginning all the way through, to do with ghosts. And it is this which I thought really an interesting matter, because the modern world divides into people who believe in ghosts and people who don't believe in ghosts. Although some people say, well, they can't make up their mind, but never mind about those. You have people who do believe and who definitely don't believe. But none of them know that this belief, this idea that when the person dies and goes into the underworld or goes wherever they go, they can come back in order to pull the hair and to annoy people who are still alive because they want their attention and their sympathy, is not a modern invention or even a medieval invention, but a truly ancient matter, because the ancient Greeks and the Romans, the Greek and Latin languages, there are many, many things about ghosts in those languages. There's stuff from ancient Egypt and stuff from ancient Mesopotamia, which is the culture I work in, ancient Iraq with the Sumerians and the Babylonians. So I thought, what do I do? No one's ever heard of this stuff. It will be a really interesting idea to look at all the material and try and write a synthesis of the first evidence that we have from history, the first narrative, the first account that we can deal with of this whole matter. So that's what I did, and I wrote this book. And this is how it works. That everybody believed, of course, that when you died, you went below into the netherworld. Now, the netherworld is a kind of place of mixed blessing. We don't have to talk about that, but it wasn't all that comfortable. But the idea was that the dead went down there and they stayed there. And they were often buried under the floor of the courtyard around which family houses were constructed, sometimes in cemeteries, sometimes in important cemeteries, sometimes buried in the wall, but very often under the floor. And the reason for that was this, that when your grandfather died, it was important to give him offerings of food and drink down there in the netherworld. So there was a pipe constructed where you could pour offerings down, where the hungry or irritable ghost will be waiting for them. But the trouble is, people didn't always remember to do it. And the other thing is that sometimes some ghosts, whatever you did, weren't happy. For example, the dead who met their end through violence, like on the battlefield, or a woman who dies in childbirth, or somebody falls down a well, or any number of things, hit by lightning, or a wall falls on them and they have a violent death, then they can't rest. They can't find that tranquility below, so they come back. And this is where the whole story gets interesting, because the evidence is very rich and very varied, because we have letters, we have incantations to get rid of ghosts, we have spells and rituals to drive them away, we have people who could tell you if you saw a ghost what it meant, whether it was good or bad, and all this stuff. So I put it all into one book, so that anybody who's interested in the whole subject of ghosts, and actually a lot of people are underneath interested in the subject of ghosts, could find out how old it was, from the beginning of time. The first historical resources, people had the same kind of ideas in their minds. And they had their own sympathetic or unsympathetic ways of dealing with the problem.
So, Irving, one of the things that you mentioned a little while ago was, this whole idea of burying people below their homes, and, those dead folk can reappear as ghosts. Interestingly, in India, you don't see this in India's first civilization. So, the Indus people, people who were part of the Harappan civilization, the bodies of their dead were removed from living areas. Yes. So some of them were cremated, others were buried in graves at the edge of settlements. But yes. This proclivity to remove the dead from areas of habitation was actually not shared by many other ancient cultures in India. So much before the first cities of India emerged, you had hunter-gatherers in the Gangetic plains who, of course, buried their dead, kept them very close to them, obviously, just below their hearths and homes, and with ornaments and tools and pieces of red ochre. And later, agricultural societies also did this. And one of the most interesting is a place called Inamgang, which is in Western Maharashtra, where while interring the skeletons within the habitation area, most of the adult skeletons had their lower extremities chopped off below the ankle. So I think those who were still living above did not at all relish the possibility of those dead and below deciding to take a walk, if I may say so. So
absolutely.
Yes. So this fear of the dead rising, I imagine, is very real. And do you see a lot of this in ancient Mesopotamia?
No, it's a rather different situation. The impression one gets from reading the inscriptions that deal with it is that human beings were rather sympathetic to ghosts, because the idea was that if they did come up, they had a grievance, or they had something which couldn't be settled. And they had a rational view of it. So either you dealt with the grievance, you supplied what they wanted, or alternatively, if they were willful ghosts who were not controllable and malicious and dangerous, which some of them were, then a professional person would be brought in to examine the case and come up with a ritual which would compel the ghost to go back to the underworld. Now, none of that stuff in itself is particularly surprising, but the reflex of it, the consequence of it, is that in the texts, people are not normally really scared of ghosts, not really, or really resentful. They have a sort of sympathy with them. Now, this is an unusual matter. They didn't have the idea, which came later, that ghosts were necessarily very bad news. That's a kind of more of a medieval idea. They saw ghosts as the people they were when they were still alive. Now, as a result of this, there's one interesting insight, because if you look at all the ghosts that we have account of, or we can sense their character, some of them are rather ineffective and sort of shy and non-committal. And some of them are perfectly malleable, some of them are reasonable, some of them are Nazi. Some of them are nasty, some of them are malicious, and some are absolutely lethal psychopaths. So you have the whole span of human types in the ghosts which might come and cause trouble. And the fact is that these characteristics are shared by living persons. You have shy people, nice people, horrible people, and psychopaths. So a psychopath in daily life, once dead, would be a psychopathic ghost. And at the harsh end of everything, they had this idea that when you went to sleep, you were vulnerable because however you do it, one of your ears is exposed. If you have your head on the pillow, you can't really avoid it. So when you are asleep with your ear vulnerable, some of the nasty ghosts can come in and whoosh, go into your ear. And once they get inside you, they are very destructive. They can drive a person mad, upset their mind, affect their lungs and everything. So when you had that sort of trouble, there were exorcists or professionals who had very powerful ways of driving the ghost out. And one of the ways they did it, which is quite interesting, is this. The first idea is, say you're, as it were, making a nice salad in the kitchen, cutting up your vegetables, and then a ghost comes in of your great aunt all of a sudden out of the blue. And you jump like this, like when you see a mouse in the kitchen. And you think, oh no, here we go again. We'll have to do something about it. We'll have to get somebody in to deal with it and all that. So the first step, if you have a ghost problem, is you go down to the gate, the market by the gate in the town, and you get one of the people who does writing to make an amulet for you about ghosts, go away, leave me alone, or something like this. And you wear it around your neck, written on a bit of clay, and you have this defensive amulet. Or you have other kinds of amulet by the bed or whatever, and they're like the first defense. So the idea is that a ghost comes in the house looking for trouble and sees this magic spell, thinks, perhaps I won't risk it, perhaps it's too dangerous, and you're safe. But really determined ghosts are not put off by any amulets, and they come and they torment people. And so you have to have a kind of complicated ritual of one kind or another to deal with it. I'll tell you, these tablets, they're made of clay, right? They're found buried in the ground. Some of them have been buried in the ground for thousands of years. And sometimes they were broken before they were buried in the ground. Sometimes through archaeological movement, they get broken. So when these ancient clay documents come to light, they are often incomplete. Now, in the 19th century, when the British Museum started its excavations in Iraq, in these ancient cities, they found cuneiform tablets in great number, which, because of the administration of the Turkish government, most of them came to the British Museum to be put back together again as far as possible, the fragments, and studied and translated. Well, we have I have to tell you, Professor, 130,000 pieces of clay. That's quite a large amount, and most of them are broken. So since about 1860, people who do this, who work on the collections, are always trying to find bits that join together to make a bigger text. Well, I found something in the museum which I have to tell you about with this regard, because one of the most broken tablets, which doesn't, when you first see it, look like anything at all, turns out to be a human document of magnetic importance, because it is drawn up by a professional person for getting rid of ghosts. So this must be a guy who had a kind of practice, who was known about in the town, who would be called in. So in this instance, there was somebody who was troubled by a ghost in the family, who was an old man. So I suppose great uncle or a grandfather or one of those persons. And according to the family, this old family member kept coming back and getting on people's nerves. And eventually they called in a professional. So the professional discusses with the family exactly what the problem is. And his idea is this: well, if this old man is coming back to haunt you because he's unhappy, maybe he's lonely. So perhaps what we will do is furnish him with a lover. So this is the idea. The exorcist is to make a small model out of clay of the ghost, and then another small model out of clay of this female, seductive and beautiful female. And when they are ready and been dressed in bits and pieces, they are to be buried in a hole facing sunset with bits of stuff for their travel. And this is the idea, that the lady, the woman, takes the old man with his hands tied together down, down, down to the underworld, where they live happily ever after and never come back. This is the idea. Well, it's rather endearing and it's rather sweet, but that's certainly what they believe to be an effective system. But the most important thing is that the man who had this tablet made drawings on the surface of the clay of the ghost and the woman, drawn with a fine point, so that the practitioner who had access to it would know what they looked like, what to make. So this was written, this thing, in the 4th century BC, so quite a long time ago. And the thing is this: I called this book The First Ghosts because the written evidence is the oldest evidence we have. But in this case, this is the first drawing, because there's no earlier human drawing of a ghost that could possibly be known in the whole history of the world before this one from Babylon of the 4th century BC. So I'll tell you a secret, it's rather funny. Now this book's come out with this special drawing on, I'll send you a picture of it for fun. The thing about it is, this tablet from Babylon with this drawing is going to go in the Guinness Book of Records, because it's the oldest drawing of a ghost. I am so excited about it. I even have a certificate about it. So how do you like that?
Wow, congratulations.
Well, it's the only suitable word.
This is really awesome. You know, you mentioned while you were speaking these ghost amulets. I mean, one of the things that struck me about the amulets was, of course, I mean, they were plant amulets, but some of them were like really ghoulish. You know, a dog's tongue and a soiled rag, which is in the hide of a dead cow, with a dormouse tendon. And, you know, you have to put it around your neck. I mean, it can get rid of your life. I mean, forget getting rid of ghosts. I mean, you know, first of all, having something like that, so smelly, and then, you know, all this death around your neck of various forms. You know, what was the rationale behind that?
Well, the first point I would make is that I think in ancient Mesopotamia, I don't think people bathed every night. And I think they had a higher resistance to what you might call natural smells than people might do today, certainly in certain parts of the world. So I think that I agree with you. At first sight, it looks like it's a hazardous matter, but of course, they'll all be dried. They'd all be dried because it's very hot, like in India, the same kind of situation. So in the end, you'd have this disgraceful looking rubbish hanging around your neck, which your mother might say, get rid of that immediately. It's unhealthy. It looks disgusting. But each of the parts would have in the mind of the man who made it specific messages, specific functions, and just getting rid of kind of ideas. And of course, the idea of wearing bracelets or necklaces of herbs and mysterious pieces for this sort of purpose is a universal thing around the world. And I think that the person who needed such a thing would be so grateful to have something that they could trust, that if every time they bent down, a horrible smell came up to assail their nostrils, they would say to themselves, well, I'll just have to put up with that. And maybe they thought also, if it was really smelly, they might have thought that the ghosts too wouldn't like it. But you know, it's not just a matter of herbs and rat's tails and all that kind of stuff. They also had amulets with magic words on. And all around the world, there are amulets with magic words. Sometimes they're from scriptures of one kind or another. Sometimes the scriptures are written back to front or in a way that you can't immediately understand, or they're abbreviated and all sorts of things like that. So on the whole, the study of amulets, which have pictures and or writing on, even in the modern age, you can more or less understand the idea behind them. But in the case of the ghost amulets from Mesopotamia, it is very remarkable that the words that they used to get rid of the ghosts, the powerful banishing words that will frighten the ghosts, are not in the Sumerian language, which is what people spoke first, or the Babylonian language, the two languages of ancient Mesopotamia. They're in a totally unknown language. They are what we call in English, at least, mumbo jumbo. You know, this word when you have so-called powerful words from another country, like in Aladdin and stories like that for children. You have to say the magic words and blah, 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 nobody knows what they mean. And they're very powerful because they're abracadabra type words. Well, you might think that having abracadabra type words is a modern thing to do with fairy tales. But when you go back to Mesopotamia of the first millennium BC and the second millennium BC, you discover that people prize amulets for a very specific thing of which they are frightened, with words that nobody understands. So it's a very old idea that unintelligible words to us are more powerful than words. If you say, go away, ghost, I don't like you, go away, it's okay. But if you say words that the ghost doesn't understand, the ghost gets nervous and gets jumpy. You know, Professor, there's one thing I have to tell you, which I think is most important. Having written this book, it took me nearly 3 years. In fact, it was a bit late. It was a bit late. And my editor once rang up and said, where's this manuscript? We're expecting this manuscript. And I said, well, it's complicated. Yes, I see. I say, well, look, tell me, he said, do we need to employ a ghostwriter? Ha, 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 ha. I thought that was a mean and nasty joke. So I worked very hard indeed to be my own ghostwriter. And I wrote back and said, any more persecution like this and you'll make a ghost of me. So be careful. So we found a kind of compromise. So I enjoyed myself because I've used all these ancient words I've translated from these long dead languages, Sumerian and Babylonian, into English, and put notes in to explain the hard things of how we know this and how we know that, so people can see it's not just out of my head, but it's off these real documents and how we understand them. So there are lots of unexpected things, some quite comic, some rather frightening, but the most important thing is this. I've come to the conclusion that in ancient Mesopotamia, you didn't have people like you do today who do believe in ghosts or don't believe in ghosts. That dichotomy did not exist in real antiquity. People did not either believe or disbelieve in ghosts. They took them for granted. They were part of real life. everybody took ghosts for granted. Like you take the weather and the crying of children and illness and war and all the other things that beset human beings. It's part of the world. And nobody said to their neighbor, you know, I thought I saw a ghost yesterday. And the neighbor says, what are you, how can you be so naive? No, ghosts don't really exist. It's just a kind of fiction, you know, people, no such conversation ever happened. Everybody knew that ghosts were real. Now, this is an extraordinary matter because in the modern Western world, like Manhattan and London, most people will never discuss ghosts. You know, they never say anything about it. They change the subject and all that. And the discussion is always between, do you believe in them and do you not believe in them? But the thing is this, I believe that when you study antiquity, and for sure the Indus Valley population will fit under this umbrella, that the default position of Homo sapiens, the basic working position of Homo sapiens, is the belief that when you're dead, you go somewhere. And whatever it is that you can't see that goes somewhere, if it can go there, it can come back. And I believe that the innocent, naive human belief system, the structure of the human mind, is that ghosts were part of the whole working of the universe. Plants die and they are reborn, people are buried and so forth, and they come back when they're unhappy. I believe this is a deep-seated human general rule. So this is it. As I visualize it, you have the stratum of belief in humanity that ghosts are part of our world. And then this, so what you might call naive belief system, encounters A, religion, and B, science. And in the face of science and religion, the innate natural belief then is assaulted by disagreement, depending on your religious system or your scientific working. But you end up with an increasing number of persons who discard their so-called inherited view of the matter, and with their so-called rational minds say, well, it's not compatible with religious belief, or it is compatible with religious belief, but it's not compatible with science because no one can prove they existed, and scientists will say that. So you have this dichotomy in the end, in the modern world in which I live, where people are more or less sharply divided between people who believe in ghosts and scientists and all sorts of other persons who think they know best, say they don't exist. Now, this is the thing. Lots of people I know never say anything about ghosts, never mention ghosts. Sometimes I've known people for 30 or 40 years, they never said anything. But one day when the question comes up, people say things like this. You know, it's a funny thing. When I was a student, my auntie told me one afternoon that when she was a girl, something happened to her she could never understand. And she saw something and she thought she saw a ghost, but she never told anybody because they thought they'd laugh at her. And out comes the story. And my idea is that you have people who say, I'll never believe in ghosts, whatever you tell me. But the great proportion of what we might call normal people, real people who live in families and villages and on farms and in the countryside where the weather is right on top of them and animals live and die in their hands, and things come in the night and scratchings come and horrible things come after dead children come in and all this kind of stuff, which is the situation how the world has always been and still is, outweigh the people who claim that it's all nonsense. So in writing this book, my idea was to put the question of implicitly, to put the question of people who say they've seen a ghost but never tell anybody on a different footing, given the demonstrable antiquity of the belief system. For 4,000 years, where people weren't bashful or embarrassed, it's part of daily life, and then it's suppressed, it's crushed down. So that seems to me the reality of it. And I bet you all over India, if you went round with a bicycle and sat under a tree and talked to people in any village you like and said, tell me something. When you were a girl, did you ever see a ghost? You'd probably be there for months because everybody has seen them and everybody knows about them, and they never talk about them, at least not to other people. So I have an idea. I think in India, we should start a big institute called ghost investigations. Now, and I don't mean investigations of things that fly around in hotel rooms and plates that fall off the table and make a noise, or people who go woo, 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 and they make things up. And I'm interested in the real narrative of real persons who have a long life and have seen everything, and they know what's what. And when you ask them about it and get them to talk, you find out all sorts of stuff. And the upshot of it will be, I believe, that the sort of narratives that individuals have inside them share a huge amount in common. And the basic message, universally, probably back since the Paleolithic age, the basic message is this: that normally speaking, when people pass away, when they die, wherever they go, whatever happens to them, we don't see them again. But when they do come back, it's because they are unhappy, that they have a trouble. And that is the working of it. That's the general working of it. So I think if you had an institute with discrete persons with bicycles and go around India asking persons questions, in 150 years' time, we'll have a very interesting new book.
Well, that's great. I think we just, have a few minutes. And, since you mentioned, these dissatisfied ghosts, I just want to say in North India, the most dreaded of the spirits is what is called a churel.
I know about the churel. I know, but yes, the churel is not a ghost.
But who's left the world with unsatisfied desires, and then, is just roaming around. So, and churels are actually mentioned in some of the old texts of India. That's true for bhoot. That's true for the term pret. That's also true for churels. Of course, the meanings change. And that brings me, actually, if we can very quickly have you come in to talk about the Bible. I mean, how different is, because, you do discuss the Bible in your book, from the material fabric of early Mesopotamia. But I must say that we just have 3 to 4 minutes for this.
Well, first, the point is the churel herself a ghost, or is she not an evil spirit? Because ghosts are human and evil spirits are not human, so they are a different category. I'm not sure if the churel is in fact a ghost rather than a spirit. The only thing is, when they wrote the Bible in Hebrew, when it was originally written, the whole idea was to get rid of the horrible pagan wicked world which existed before the beginnings of the Hebrew religion. It didn't want to talk about the Canaanites or what they did, because they had lots of gods and devils and demons and this. So in the Bible, there's very little information. It's squashed. But the best case study is when King Saul, in the book of Samuel, in big trouble with the Philistines, goes to see what they call the witch of Endor, to call up from below the spirit of the prophet Samuel. Samuel had died, and Saul was in such trouble, he just broke all the, I don't care, get him up, bring him up, I have to talk to Samuel. So this is what's described in the Bible. They go up the mountain in the dark, and she calls on Samuel, and Samuel comes up from the hole in his robes, and he says to the king, "Why have you disturbed me?" And Saul says, "God won't answer me. I don't know what's happening. You have to tell me what's going to happen." And Saul said, "You're doomed. You're doomed. It's all over with you." And when he's explained to the king what happens, he goes back down into the underworld and is not seen anymore. Now, why I wrote about it was this was another example of, never mind the official literature, when Saul was in extremis, and knowing his dynasty was finished and the country was finished and the Philistines were going to murder everybody and God wouldn't answer his prayer, he didn't say, I wonder if ghosts are real. I wonder if we could try having a ghost. He went straight to the expert and said, "Bring me Samuel," like ordering it over the internet. Bring up the guy. I need to, and the whole matter is so unself-conscious and flowing, that you can see that at the time, about 1000 BC, the whole system that I'm alluding to, where people took the existence of the ghost for granted, and that even under certain circumstances, the ghost could be brought up to give you an answer, is the same level, the same understanding. And when you read the Bible, it stands out a bit like the proverbial red thumb, because all the things to do with those ideas, superstitions and demons and devils and ghosts in the Bible, are almost excised by the writers. They're almost excised. They are abominations unto the Lord. But in that story, the whole story is there. It's unbelievable. So I've had a lot of fun writing this book. And this is my idea. Anybody who's ever seen a ghost, or thought they'd seen a ghost, or their mum saw a ghost, or they've heard about ghosts, or they've wondered, or once, all those sorts of things, and think, am I mad? Did I imagine it all? Did I imagine it all? If they have a look through this book, then they will see they are part of a timeless tradition that goes back even beyond the Indus Valley into the shadiest of the past.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Irving Finkel, and I'm sure the audience of this conversation will enjoy your insights immensely.
How lovely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye-bye then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Irving Finkel and Nayanjot Lahiri, for a delightful conversation on the origins of and mystery surrounding ghosts. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions and JLF writer shorts that have been specially curated for you.